On behalf of the 63rd Readiness Division, this is Chaplain Siebold, and the title of this devotion today is called Shoes, which is probably one of my favorite devotions. And I will be reading from Exodus 33, verses 1 through 5. So it says, Now Moses was pasturing the flock of Jethro, in his father-in-law, and the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from the midst of the bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, yet the bush was not consumed. So Moses said, I must turn aside now and go and see this marvelous sight, why the bush is not burned up. And when the Lord saw that he turned aside to look, God called to him from the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here I am. And then he said, Do not come near here. Remove your sandals from your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. So removing of one's shoes has a meaning in biblical times. My father's Canadian by birth and citizenship, and I was born in Canada. And my mother was a U.S. citizen, or was. So I have lived between two countries most of my life. And in Canada, it would be rude not to remove your shoes when you enter a house unless they tell you can keep your shoes on. So I have kept that tradition in my own home when I remove my shoes when I enter. So in biblical times, one would remove their shoes or sandals and have their feet cleaned when entering a home. And in the story of Ruth and Boaz, you'd remove your shoe and pass it to another for removing of a responsibility or selling of property. So soldiers and travelers and persons of rank wore shoes. Putting on shoes was a sign of preparation for a journey. And one pair of shoes would last one journey. So Moses started out as a slave child, wasn't adopted by royalty, and his first pair of shoes would have been of high rank. And then he fled Egypt. He would have worn out that pair of shoes and replaced them with shepherd sandals. And when he left the burning bush, he wore out those shepherd sandals in the journey back to Egypt and replaced them with a pair of sandals that God preserved from the liberation of Egypt through the desert time when God took care of them. So each time he changed his shoes, he changed his path in life. And when God asked him to remove his shoes, I wonder myself why. His feet would have not have been any cleaner than his shoes would have been when he stepped onto that holy ground. Was God really asking him to pass the responsibility of what he had been carrying from his childhood to liberate the Jews to God? Or did God take the responsibility that Moses tried to carry in Egypt and failed and had to flee to Midian? So I have changed my shoes in my lifetime, and I'm about to change my army boots for a different pair of shoes that will carry me into a different path than what I'm on now. And sometimes I don't always understand why life takes us, or sometimes we don't always understand where life takes us and know where it prepares us to do. But the type of shoes you choose to wear and the ones you remove in order to wear another is a choice we all make. And I pray that the shoes we are wearing are the shoes that God has requested you to remove or to put on. So my prayer for you today is this: God, the one and only that calls our hearts to serve, be the destiny of our paths. Help us to choose the right pair of shoes that are right for the journeys ahead of us and guide and direct our lives. And when it's time to remove our shoes and hear your voice, help us to turn aside and listen. Amen.